Hello, people of God. Welcome to our today's podcast on the Let's Keep Our Education Catholic. We are grateful to God that we are privileged with the gift of life, considering some unprecedented challenges that people continue to experience on daily basis around the world. In this episode, we briefly journey through the first part of the historical account of Catholic school education in Nigeria. The entire historical account will be split into chunks in the different episodes. The intention for the history is never to share a collection of names, date, and facts, but briefly from the perspective of this podcast, how to keep our education Catholic. Link the narrative to the present to understand it as a model or probably to grapple with its realities and some complex questions. We want to understand what impact and challenges were recorded. How did we get to where we are? What can we learn from the history? How do we bring those learnings to meet the demands of the 21st century? I believe a critical understanding of the historical events will help us to ask innovative questions embedded in the historical milieu so that we can improve the present and open channels for the future of Catholic school education. Before I dive into the historical account, it is important that we understand that Nigeria as a British colony, the colonization account is intertangled with the endeavors of the Catholic missionaries. So the Catholic historical account will be incomplete without making reference to British colonization in Nigeria. The first missionary endeavor, beginning from 1515 to 1688. Education in the pre-missionary era in Nigeria was indigenous, focused on informal training and acquisition of vocational and technical skills. In the year 1472, the Portuguese merchants arrived in Benin and Lagos. Having contacted and negotiated with the Oba of Benin, the traditional ruler, in 1485, the merchants started their trading ports in Benin. The Portuguese, having permeated the area, opened opportunities for the Portuguese missionaries to move into the region. Around 1515, the Portuguese missionaries, with the approval of the Oba of Benin, established the first Catholic school at the Oba's palace for the benefit of the Oba's sons and the sons of the chiefs. This was a formal education that Nigerians have conceptualized as Western education because it was introduced by the West. So, given the restricted patriarchal Nigerian culture in the early years, only male children were granted the right to education, which of course has changed over time. Between 1515 to 1552, the Portuguese efforts grew and they established a number of trading ports along the river Benin and Lagos and later to Wari. In 1572, the missionaries expanded to Sao Tome off the coast of Nigeria to set up seminaries for training of priests and teachers. Around this period, they also opened churches and schools in Wari, Nigeria. The missionaries' endeavor progressed until the region was struck by the epidemic disease of transatlantic slave trade. The slave trade wiped out the entire effort, and there was a complete collapse of Catholic schools in 1688. When we hear about the slave trade in Africa, the majority of the people born within the 21st century have minimal or no knowledge of that history. Of course, it is not entirely their fault. It is part of Nigerian history that was removed from the school curriculum, although there are recent indications that it has been reintroduced. But where do you find the teachers? Some have lost interest or have changed careers for various reasons. So to bring that into the school reality is still far-fetched. But for the purpose of this podcast and to carry everyone along, I'm going to summarize the transatlantic slave trade in Africa. The transatlantic slave trade was an enterprise of the European people around the mid 15th century, and according to historians, it lasted for over 300 years. It was a barbaric, inhumane action of selling human beings for the European interests of economic exploitation, political subjugation, and other evils associated with human trafficking. Nigeria is just one of the countries in Africa which experienced this phenomenon of the transatlantic slave trade. But to set the record straight here, slavery in Africa, especially in Nigeria, was not an invention of the West. It predates the arrival of the Europeans. However, I would argue that they leveraged the existing culture, which we are not proud of anyway, to use Africans to sell Africans. So if the Europeans who arrived first in Nigeria were the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Germans. This group of people embarked on selling Nigerians and, of course, other human beings from African countries as slaves to plantation owners in Europe who sought for expansive supply of forced labor from countries in Africa. Some of these slaves were also sent to America to ferry them to these various destinations in Europe and America. These slaves were brutally tortured, and some who could not survive the torture died on the way. Some authors titled their publications on this A Journey of Chains because they were in chains, treated like animals. Even animals of today are not treated in such a manner. So, this was the reality that halted the progress of Kali School, which eventually led to its collapse in 1688. We can understand here that as it is part of Nigerian history, it is connected to Catholic school history. Here are some takeaways. Earlier, I talked about the Portuguese missionaries being the first to establish Catholic schools and how gender sensitive the schools were, given the patriarchal culture of Nigeria as well as that of Western colonial countries, and that this initial effort lasted for only 2 decades as a result of slave trafficking. I highlighted that the institution of slavery and slave trading is highly reprehensible and it is a menace to human existence. It is dehumanizing and damaging to society. As it is connected to the history of Catholic schools, it should flow alongside a historical account. There are such topics when introduced in the instructional curriculum, students can draw a connection to the present, and even as a school community, policymakers, principals, and teachers can use such aspects of the history to teach against certain attitudes and also promote and advocate for human inclusiveness, advocate for equity and justice. There are a lot more to learn from it and from history. All of it will strengthen our efforts to keep our education Catholic. Let me know what you think in the comment section. I'm going to share some questions. Kindly react to them by sharing your opinion. Thank you and God bless you.